former candidate for the U.S. Senate, longtime radio talk show host, author, and conservative policy advocate.
Justices to the Supreme Court, the left has been in open panic.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
War in the Republican Party. Can a ceasefire be reached, or will the conflict escalate? Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. Republicans have done the deed, removing Never-Trumper Liz Cheney from her leadership position in the House of Representatives, raising the stakes in an ugly battle for control of the GOP between Trump loyalists and establishment forces. We will analyze the conflict, but also discuss how politics can indeed make strange bedfellows, like Donald Trump and Elizabeth Warren. We'll explain. But what happened to the Brexit-Trump uprising of 2016? Brexit is watered down, Trump is out, and the left has consolidated power. LibertyNation.com international author and managing editor Mark Angelides joins us to discuss the fate of the populist nationalist movement in the U.S. and around the world. Plus, LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza examines threats and promising developments regarding your individual liberty in Talkin' Liberty.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We kick things off with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out an assembly line of wacky, astonishing, damnable, and ultimately revealing things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. It's now official. The Republican Party is in the throes of a civil war after the expected dismissal of Liz Cheney from her third-ranking position in the House GOP. The two-term Congresswoman from Wyoming and daughter of former Vice President Dick Cheney has become a lightning rod for a party in turmoil after she voted to impeach then-President Trump following the Capitol riot on January 6th. Cheney's taken it upon herself to lead the anti-Trump pro-establishment forces trying to bring the party back to the days before Trump. And that battle is now fully joined. Cheney attacked Trump in the House the day before being stripped of her role as GOP conference chair. And then after the deed was done, she vowed to never let him return.
Today, we face a threat America has never seen before. A former president who provoked a violent attack on this Capitol in an effort to steal the election has resumed his aggressive effort to convince Americans that the election was stolen from him. He risks inciting further violence. Millions of Americans have been misled by the former president. They have heard only his words, but not the truth, as he continues to undermine our democratic process, sowing seeds of doubt about whether democracy really works at all. I will do everything I can to ensure that the former president never again gets anywhere near the Oval Office.
Does Liz Cheney understand the residual popularity of Trump the president, if not Trump the person? Well, her Senate colleague Lindsey Graham says apparently not.
The most popular Republican in America, it's not Lindsey Graham, it's not Liz Cheney, it's Donald Trump. People on our side of the aisle believe that Trump policies worked. They're disappointed that he lost. And to try to erase Donald Trump from the Republican Party is insane. And the people who try to erase him are going to wind up getting erased.
Erased? That sounds like canceled, which is frankly what each side wants for the other right about now. Hitting back on Graham was Cheney colleague and fellow Never-Trumper Adam Kinzinger, Illinois congressman, saying his party's in denial about January 6th and going off the rails.
When Liz Cheney and people like me and and others are out there saying this is a real concern, guys. If we just wash this over, we act like January 6th really was Antifa and BLM, wink, wink. Listen to those of us that predicted what was going to happen on the 6th, because what we're predicting is going to happen right now if we continue to lie to our voters is the complete and utter destruction of the Republican Party. I have watched us compromise with crazy basically every 2 years. And all that becomes is the starting position for the next iteration towards crazy. And this party's a little off the rails now.
Now, speaking of off the rails, you absolutely will not believe the person who endorsed Liz Cheney this week. I'll play it for you in just a bit, but spoiler alert, it might be the last person on the planet you'd want standing behind you in just a bit. But as you would expect, the likes of Never-Trump Congressman Adam Kinzinger is receiving aid and comfort from the left, like when MSNBC contributor Kurt Bardella actually said the Republicans are the new Al-Qaeda.
I've been thinking to myself this whole time, Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, the Taliban, the people who wanted to do harm to our nation and to our way of life and our democracy, they got nothing on what this Republican Party is doing.
Okay, debate that among yourselves. Who's worse, Republicans or Al-Qaeda? Take your time, consider your answer. Toss a coin if necessary. But in another sharp escalation of a war that's essentially been going on for more than half a century, Israelis and Palestinians unleashed brutal attacks on each other over the last many days, which set loose the forces of the left, calling Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu a fascist and all the rest. Witness far-left Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib going so far as to blame her own president for continuing the same support of Israel the U.S. has been doling out for decades.
This is an apartheid system, and Palestinians on the ground have been telling us for decades that their homes have been demolished, that they've been targeted, that violence has been met by Israeli-led forces under Netanyahu's racist policies. What we're really telling Palestinians fighting apartheid is the same thing being told to my fellow Black Americans across our country here and that are fighting against police brutality. I have yet to hear anybody from the Biden administration declare that our money will not be used to degrade, to dehumanize, and to kill or evict people out of their homes.
You know, Palestinians are actually more isolated now than ever following the 4 peace and trade agreements engineered by President Trump between Israel and traditional allies of the Palestinians. But this was undoubtedly a bad week for Biden, probably his worst so far. Between the situation in Israel, the attack on the Colonial Pipeline, interrupting the flow of oil and gas to the pump, illegals flowing over the border at the highest rate in 20 years, all exasperated by what Lindsey Graham calls a weak president.
But I've never been more concerned about our national security than I am now. Everybody sees Joe Biden as weak. We're going back into the Iran deal. The Arabs and the Israelis are beside themselves. Iran is getting stronger. China is threatening us at every turn. And Russia is troops on the border of the Ukraine. So this is a dangerous time. Voids are filled when people are weak in the United States. When the American president is weak, that empowers all the bad guys, and you see that happening every day on the world stage.
But another thing happening on the world stage, led by the U.S. as usual, is the dying embers, we hope and pray, of COVID-19. Have we turned the corner? Almost, says Biden's COVID chief Jeff Zients.
I would say we are turning the corner. We now have 58% of adult Americans with at least one shot. Over 110 million Americans fully vaccinated. The president has set a goal of 70% of Americans being vaccinated with at least one shot by July 4th. So we've got a path ahead of us, which will involve getting people even easier access to the vaccine, making sure that people build their confidence, those who have questions about the vaccine, that we answer their questions, and making sure that we do what we've done from the beginning, which is do this in a fair and equitable way.
Why does President Biden, in a room full of vaccinated journalists, with everybody in that room vaccinated, why does he need to wear a mask?
The president is going to continue to follow the CDC guidance.
But how reliable is the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control? Maine Senator Susan Collins, not one to make rash statements, put it to CDC head Rachel Walensky in a Senate hearing.
Dr. Walensky, I used to have the utmost respect for the guidance from the CDC. I always considered the CDC to be the gold standard. I don't anymore. The conflicting, confusing guidance from your agency has undermined public confidence and contradicts the scientific guidance of many experts.
It did seem that at times the CDC was just groping in the dark, like so many of us, or most of us, during the pandemic. Finally, I promised it, so here it is. Liz Cheney, endorsed by perhaps the last person on earth she'd want on her side, endorsing truth and honesty. I'm grimacing. O.J. Simpson?
Now, I got to admit, I was not a fan of Liz Cheney. Don't get me wrong, I'm 50-50 on her politics, but I didn't like her. And then I just realized recently the reason I didn't like her had to do with her father. Probably my least favorite politician of my adult life, former Vice President Dick Cheney. Then I saw a show the other day and I saw a quote by Voltaire that said that patriotism was the enemy of mankind. Thought about that a little bit. Somehow I started thinking about the Republican Party. And it seemed that fact-based truth and honesty seem to be the enemy of many of these Republican politicians.
Wow. Just wow. Folks, you can't make that stuff up.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Imagine for a moment if House Speaker Nancy Pelosi suddenly said she agrees with Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy about, say, how to fix the nation's infrastructure. Or McCarthy said he disagrees with Pelosi on certain policies but finds her leadership laudable. Or, for good measure, try to envision Donald Trump saying anything nice about Joe Biden, or vice versa. That's about how much of a headshaker recent statements by Senator Elizabeth Warren turned out to be. After Facebook's own so-called Supreme Court, formally titled the Oversight Board but hardly adherent to any sort of legal standard or judicial process, extended its ban on former President Trump, the left-wing senator from Massachusetts and progressive icon ripped into not Trump, but the social media giant. Warren began with what almost sounded like an obligatory condemnation of the 45th president, but then she launched into a tirade against Facebook, which, despite Warren's previous history of anti-social media statements, must have shocked leftists who were still celebrating the extension of Trump's ban. And it had to seem even more incredible to those leftists who had the opposite criticism of Facebook from Warren, that they refused to make the ban permanent. But Warren, in effect, defended Trump with a screed along the lines of, I don't agree with you, but I will defend to the death your right to say it.
First, I'm glad that Donald Trump's not going to be on Facebook. Suits me. But part two is that this is just further demonstration that these giant tech companies are way, way, way too powerful. And listen to the arrogance of it. The name of the group that made the decision is called the Supreme Court. I missed the part where those people had hearings in front of Congress before, and were voted on before they were made decision makers with this kind of authority. You know, we need to break up these big tech companies.
So apparently politics really does make the strangest of bedfellows. And Senator Warren, not always known for her political independence, deserves credit for speaking truth to power, even in a circumstance where a political enemy ends up being cast in a more favorable light, as a victim rather than perpetrator. At a time when the country is praying, literally or figuratively, for reconciliation between the left and right as the two sides themselves continue their assault on each other, we look for any sign of agreement that could lower the temperature on the tribal warfare currently defining the state of politics. And both sides appear appropriately wary of the power of social media. Perhaps it's for different reasons, the right fearing its censorship, the left its growing power. But they all recognize, no matter your ideology, how quickly Facebook, Twitter, and the rest can make you or break you. Can left and right meet somewhere near the middle to tamp down the remarkable and chilling level of power accumulated by these titans of the 21st century? Well, the answer is the same as on infrastructure, where both sides agree there's a problem, but come at it from different, if not opposite, directions. But we have seen truly bipartisan efforts before, even in the balkanized political environment that's overtaken the country for more than half a decade. In 2018, the two parties came together around the issue of criminal justice reform, passing a genuinely bipartisan bill that was hailed by both President Trump and Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. May that achievement serve as both an inspiration and a blueprint for responsible debate between Republicans and Democrats on something, anything. And social media looks like a logical place to start.
Hi, I'm Lisa K. Donner, along with Mark Angelides, Sarah Cowgill, Tim Donner, and Scott Cosenza, and this is Liberty Nation.
Now let's take a look at the LibertyNation.com electoral leaderboard. It's still 238 for Joe Biden.
What if stories and legends can offer us the key to unraveling the hottest political issues of the day and apply their lessons to understanding the chaos of modern politics?
Impeach 45!
Only where freedom of speech is honored can people who look, sound, or think differently be truly free.
If you're discussing something that's difficult, the probability that you're not going to offend each other is zero.
President-elect of the United States of America, Donald Trump.
Donald J. Trump is now president.
With one click, Liberty Nation delivers tomorrow's news.
And remember, liberty.
Today.
All the time and everywhere.
LibertyNation.com. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
When folks around the world woke up on November 9th, 2016, they faced a very different world than the one they knew when they put their heads on the pillow. 5 months earlier, Britain had shocked the world with the unexpected affirmation of Brexit, leading to the eventual departure of the UK from the European Union. And then a second earthquake, the election of Donald Trump. It seemed the Western world was on fire with populism, nationalism, anti-establishment fervor. But in the 5 years since, nobody else has dropped out of the EU. The Brexit deal, now in place in England, has been watered down substantially from the original vision of the Brexit movement. Trump was vanquished in the 2020 election and has now been ostracized by his own party's establishment after the insurrection of January 6th. And the Republican Party is a hot mess, just as the forces of globalism that were summarily rejected by voters 5 years ago are on the rise again with abandon. Joining us to try and answer the question of what happened to this Brexit-Trump populist nationalist movement is a man who put a lot of energy behind Brexit and has since risen to the position of international author and managing editor at LibertyNation.com, Mark Angelides. Welcome, Mark.
Hey, Tim. Thanks for having me.
What happened to the populist fervor of 2016?
It's still there, but I feel that perhaps COVID has dampened the spirit, if not the intent behind the movement. A good example for this is actually what's happening in the United Kingdom at the moment. So just a short time ago, we had a series of local elections. And they were the results were really quite indicative of where the country is politically. See, in 2019, Boris Johnson, he won this huge victory campaigning on getting Brexit done. That was the whole purpose, because you mentioned in the intro that Brexit vote was 5 years ago almost. But of course, Brexit didn't happen on the day of the vote.
Right.
It took a lot of time. There was a lot of political to and froing, a lot of negotiations. And then there was the extended period of semi-membership where everything else was decided. So it really dampened everybody's, because everybody expected, well, many people expected, we'll wake, as you say in your intro, we'll wake up the next day and the world will be changed. That wasn't the case. It was a long, laborious process. But in the 2019 election, Boris Johnson, he took all of these seats, these parliamentary seats that were what used to be known as the Red Wall Labour seats. So these were places that had never voted Conservative. And so he got that based on the idea of Brexit. So there was still the fire for Brexit and for everything that Brexit represented. And now, even after COVID, when a lot of everybody is just tired, to be fair, especially in the United Kingdom, people have been on lockdowns for a year. And it really starts to wear on your liberty bone. But in the recent local elections, again, these same red wall places, they voted for the Conservatives. And in fact, they even won a new parliamentary seat that since its proper inception in 1974 had never voted Conservative. Now, it's not that people are more conservative. It's just they don't see the left as being willing to carry on with what Brexit promised. Now, I see that happening also in the United States, where the fire is still there, but things take so long to happen that it crushes the flames down to embers, if you catch my drift.
Mm-hmm. Now, there might be a tendency to paint Brexit and Trump with too broad a brush, too intimately intertwined, because the issues facing Brits and Americans are hardly similar. So how much of the two movements actually been similar, different, or interrelated?
I think there's a lot of crossover, certainly. But essentially the joining point, the point where they both intersect, would be culture. Yeah, it seems that both the Trump movement and the Brexit movement was very much about embracing the goodness, I guess you call it, of the culture that you're in, without being mired in the bad aspects that, though they exist, they shouldn't be the focal point or even the leading point or the overarching theme of your life, which is what a lot on the political left on both sides of the Atlantic seem to want to push at the moment. Very much so with the cultural relativism and the critical race theory. But in my view, the two things are still very much entwined. There's especially when it comes to dealing with the threat and the ideology of globalism.
You know, Mark, I've always thought we should call the MAGA movement the first movement, because Donald Trump said, unbeknownst to most, that not only should Americans put America first, but that every country should put their own interests first, and we'd have a better world. It does seem that at least more than one country in Eastern Europe is following the Brexit-Trump ideology, so to speak.
There's a few, actually. There's Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic, and Slovakia, collectively known as the Visegrad nations. But what they seem to be doing is, as you say, putting their countries first, but they're doing it in a way by they're working internationally. So it's nationalism with an internationalist perspective, rather than a globalist perspective. So they're cooperating where they need to, in terms of standing up to the EU or putting together packages that they can cooperate on. But it really is each of those countries for themselves, and that's not a bad thing. And Viktor Orban in Hungary, he's as popular as he ever was. There's certainly some controversy around him, especially if you read the European papers. But he's very much in the Trump model, as in it's my country first, and everybody else can go whistle in the wind. But I think it's the way of the future.
Okay, Mark. So wrapping it up, give us a sense of what you envision happening in and to the international populist movement, so to speak, in the next 3.5 years leading up to the U.S. election in 2024?
Okay, well, as I mentioned earlier, I think that the fire has died down a little bit. The embers are still there. And for those who've done basic woodcraft, what you really need there is oxygen. So it's really a question of what oxygen can be given to the populist movement. I was reading recently a book on the Senate throughout the ages. So before the Roman Empire, before the Empire, before the Republic, from the kings and all, and how long their system really lasted. And what you found was that so many of these families, these political families, they would adopt a populist platform in order to gain political power. And then once they had it,
right,
they would strip back into them being the establishment until somebody else came along with the next populist movement, and then the first populist would then be the old guard.
Right.
And so I fear that's what's really happening at the moment, in terms of we've had populist movements come, and we've had a lot of people jump on board of that bandwagon, and then once the main fire has sort of dwindled out, they've slipped back into the positions they were in before. So I think it is still a burning ambition for many that the populist movement, the international populist movement, carries on. But what's needed is something stable within there, a stable person fanning the flames of the first movement, as you'd call it. And I think that's possible. I mean, I see that's what Donald Trump's trying to do at the moment. He's certainly staying relevant, even though he's not on social media. It's still revivable, but it needs a stable force to keep it in the public mind.
Thanks as always, Mark.
My pleasure.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Gas prices on the minds of Americans. Marilyn Mosby, who is she and why does she matter? Bankruptcy for the National Rifle Association. We reintroduce our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor. We just shorten it to our guardian of individual liberty, Scott David Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Tim, and thank you so much.
You are very welcome. So let's talk about gas prices and the pipeline that was extorted, and then the ransom was paid off. I mean, this is like some kind of Netflix movie.
You know, Tim, the reason why I want to talk about gas prices is because inevitably when there is a crisis of supply of some basic good like gas prices, the people who are afraid of the market and want to seem like they're sort of being a hero or white knight come in and say, do not raise the price of gasoline. And the problem then becomes the pumps run dry because the gas stations have to sell the gas like there isn't this new market condition. There is a new market condition, though. The supply has collapsed. So what should that do? If there's no supply to prices, it should drive them northward. Anybody who's studied markets knows that. But the government comes in with their hand on the scales to try to be a white knight and say that everybody should be able to get gas, and then no one can get gas because of that result. The market tells people through its pricing mechanism to conserve. That's the way you can get people to conserve gasoline or any other good is by allowing the market mechanism and also for maximum freedom. It's actually a twofer. It doesn't cost anything. In fact, it actually results in a greater good for a greater number. It has that effect, that sort of communistic effect. It just happens to operate that way with the free market when you allow prices to dictate the supply.
You do realize that the free market is not in fashion, Scott.
I know that it's not in fashion. I hear the warnings of the various government authorities on the news radio talking about how they're going to clamp down and investigate these errant stories of price gouging. Meanwhile, like I said, the pumps are running dry, and price would be able to control this if people were allowed to be free in their pricing mechanism.
All right, so let's move on to a woman named Marilyn Mosby. Who is she, and why should we care about her?
She is the Baltimore district attorney, although they don't call them district attorneys in Baltimore. They call them state's attorney. And she doesn't like the way she's being covered by the local Fox affiliate, Tim. I think it's Fox 45, and they do stories all the time that impact her and mention her, and she doesn't like the coverage. She finds that it's too critical. And it's not just critical in an ordinary way that any politician hates the coverage that they get on local media, Tim. It's especially critical because it may lead to violence, and also it stinks of racism. According to her letter to the FCC, she's trying to sic the federal government to remove the broadcast license from the local TV affiliate that she disfavors.
Any indication that she has any chance of succeeding?
No, Tim. It's just there to expose her utter contempt for the First Amendment. And she is, of course, a prosecutor. Can you imagine how she finds the fundamental rights of that she has the ability to prosecute if she's so contemptuous of the First Amendment that she sends a public letter to stymie their speech?
Okay, so Scott, the National Rifle Association, the NRA, tried to file for bankruptcy as a way to avoid bigger problems. But apparently they've now failed in the state of New York, where they originally incorporated, which means that the authorities in New York have the right to sort of do what they want, don't they?
Well, that's a good question, Tim.
Yeah.
They have the legal right to do all sorts of things that the NRA doesn't want them to do in terms of enforcing and inspecting the books and their operations. This is all being driven by New York State's Attorney General Letitia James, and she campaigned as an anti-gun candidate, and also not just anti-gun generally, but specifically anti-NRA. And then she filed this petition in August that said that there was sufficient mismanagement at the top of the NRA that the organization, Tim, needed to be extinguished. It was breathtaking in that she didn't argue that there were a few corrupt people at the top, which is what she did argue, that there were just a few corrupt people at the top, that the cure for that under the state's caretaking function for these charities was to completely disband the NRA. I'm laughing because it's so, I don't know how else to react. It's so breathtaking that the nation's oldest civil rights organization, its most prominent and largest pro-gun lobby, would be just disbanded because of a few people who are acting maliciously at the top. If you believe that, I actually tend to believe those charges, or at least think there's enough smoke that they should be investigated. But when the cure is worse than the disease, you've got a problem there. And that's what the NRA tried to do with their bankruptcy filing, was avoid her regulatory inspection altogether, hoping to go to bankruptcy court and then emerge from bankruptcy court as a Texas corporation. They're
and
not going to be able
to reorganize in Texas, right?
Yes. And
but where does this leave the NRA going forward now that this gambit has failed?
Well, the judge did not dismiss the filing with prejudice. For people who don't know what that means, that would have meant that they could not refile the petition. The judge didn't say that. He did say, however, that if they refiled, it would be subject to some pretty intense scrutiny. However, that does seem to be a best option, I think, at least until they get another maybe kick out of the federal courts. It doesn't cost much in terms of filing fees or other expense to make that filing. So perhaps another bankruptcy filing. And then the other thing is, if they're unsuccessful ultimately in the federal courts with bankruptcy, Tim, they can go to the New York courts and say that Ms. Mosby is biased in a way that prejudices their rights, and she should be removed from that sort of case. And then finally, if they lose all that, they just have to argue on the merits that destroying the organization would not be an appropriate remedy to the malfeasance that's been alleged.
All right, now from the NRA, we move to the FEC, the Federal Elections Commission. They have made the decision on a case involving Donald Trump. What is it?
Well, they're not going to continue looking into the case of whether Donald Trump violated federal election law through the payment to Stormy Daniels. Tim, I know you love so much our talks about Stormy Daniels on Liberty Nation Radio. I've
come to become very, very fond of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you'll recall that Donald Trump basically paid her, I think it was 130-some thousand. Anyway, the number's not terribly important, $100,000 or so on the eve of the election so that she would not sell her story about their dalliance that occurred, I think in 2006 or something like that.
Right.
And then once that came to light, Trump was accused by Public Citizen and one of David Brock's political action committees that I can't recall the name of, violating the election law. Anybody can sort of file one of these complaints, and they did, alleging that amounted to some kind of improper campaign spending. And Michael Cohen was actually prosecuted in part for this crime and was convicted of it. So the remaining commissioners basically just didn't have any push to do it. There needs to be 4 commissioners to go forward on any one complaint. I think there's 2 or 3 Democrats and 2 or 3 Republicans on the commissioner, so there's no impetus there to go ahead. It's sort of, the commission was designed to be very slow moving at best, and it's fulfilling that function quite admirably.
You found a way to complement a federal commission. There's a first time for everything, Scott.
Well, when they're designed to be not get much done, that's the kind I like.
The wheels of democracy turn quite slowly. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
Hi, I'm Lisa K. Donner, along with Mark Angelides, Sarah Cowgill, Tim Donner, and Scott Cosenza, and this is Liberty Nation.
Now let's take a look at the LibertyNation.com electoral leaderboard. It's still 238 for Joe Biden.
What if stories and legends can offer us the key to unraveling the hottest political issues of the day and apply their lessons to understanding the chaos of modern politics?
Impeach 45!
Only where freedom of speech is honored can people who look, sound, or think differently be truly free.
If you're discussing something that's difficult, the probability that you're not going to offend each other is zero.
President-elect of the United States of America, Donald Trump.
Donald J. Trump is now president.
With one click, Liberty Nation delivers tomorrow's news.
And remember, liberty.
Today.
All the time and everywhere.
LibertyNation.com